When everyone around you says it's just a phase, or all kids do that, but you know something deeper is going on, what then? In this episode, Wes and I unpack the stereotypes that nearly broke us as parents. The terrible twos label, the just leave him, he'll be fine advice, just discipline him harder. None of it worked for our son, and trying to force it caused real damage. If you've ever felt like your child doesn't fit the mold and you're exhausted from pretending otherwise, this one's for you. If you're tired of feeling helpless during your son's meltdowns and isolated by the stress it brings to your family, and you want simple steps to open communication, reduce outbursts, and bring more peace to your home, you're in the right place. Hey, I'm Cynthia, wife and boy mom. I remember having a child who looked typical, but spent hours falling apart at home. I learned how to stay confident during the stress of meltdowns and build connection without resorting to heavy-handed parenting. If you're ready to reduce the meltdowns and aggressive behavior and finally see that what you're doing is actually helping, then grab my hand. I am the mom you've been waiting to meet. Well, I get to be back again in the studio with Wes. And today we are going to be talking about stereotypes. We mentioned it in a previous episode, and we just felt like we needed to continue in on that. Wes is like, I love stereotypes while talking about them. We don't love them themselves necessarily. And but when it pertains to your son and you as a parent and going through, the struggles or challenges that you've been through, we just really thought that this would be something that would resonate with you and, just another way that you do not feel alone in this parenting journey when you are, working through eruptions and collapse and explosive behaviors and select mutism, which is something we haven't actually talked a lot about on here, but for us what that was, how we experienced that was if a meltdown occurred or there was a violent eruption or there was full-on collapse due to just a stressful situation for our son, he often went nonverbal. He could speak, he could have conversation throughout most of the time, but there were those moments where select mutism happened. And that isn't stereotypical, if we're going to get into it right now, as what the world would call a typical child. So yeah, we just wanted to have a visit today, as we do so many other times, all the ones that are not recorded, like we said. But yeah, when you are not sitting in the alignment of the world around you, even your community or your family unit, yeah, those moments can feel quite isolating. So yeah, take it away, Wes. Let's talk about stereotypes. What comes up for you right away is when you think about the stereotypical stuff?
It's very interesting for me. Over the years, I've realized what comes up for me when I hear people talking about stereotypes in general, like even dad stereotypes or man stereotypes or woman stereotypes. But in this instance, I just think of the one that most people are familiar with is the terrible twos. And the reason I don't love them is because it tends to be a blanket statement. And it's something that somehow we can use to explain away what's happening. It's like, well, that's just that. It's just the terrible. And then we just kind of, it's a surface statement. It's a blanket statement. And somehow that's supposed to explain it. But what happens if that becomes kind of like your worldview? Well, that just must be what it is. What do you do when, okay, it's the terrible twos, okay, so it's the terrible twos. So if you believe that, well, they're just being terrible, what kind of conclusions do you come to as a parent? Oh, they're being terrible. What kind of is the natural reaction? And what I love in the beginning of the podcast, where you talk about how do we have connection without heavy-handed parenting, I think while putting a blanket statement like terrible twos on someone is like, that almost lends to, okay, my kid's being terrible. What does the world say that I need to do now? Like, what's the next step? Okay, to me, it's like, it's heavy-handed parenting. It's like coming down hard. It's like, you're giving me trouble. You're making my life hard, and so therefore, I get to now decide what happens to you because you're not being a good boy or whatever it happens to be. So we come in on top, over and above them, and whatever heavy-handed parenting means, to each person. It means, overall, I think it means that the child really gets told what to do, what not to do, and I'm the boss and you're not the boss.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I picture when I think of heavy-handed parenting. And so, yeah, so when I think about the stereotypes of, in this case, the terrible twos, that's what I see. That's the progression of thought of like, okay, if that's what I'm going to believe, that my child is just being terrible, then this is the next step. This is the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And the result at the end is that you've got zero connection with your child, and you've caused a little bit of separation and distance and mistrust there, because what if that child was like learning how to say no, I don't like this. No, in a way of like, I'm an individual. What if the clue is they're actually asking for you to hear them, to see them, and we interpret that as like, you're disobeying me, you're being rebellious, you're being this. And so in comes heavy-handed parenting, because maybe that's one of the only tools we know. And that's why I'm so passionate about that, is because there's another way, there's another pathway. It's the one blanket statement leads to unhealthy things in my view.
And as you were talking about, the label of the terrible twos, I think for us and for our listeners that these reactions in their child very likely started way early. It wasn't even that it started in that age, 2 to 3 range. This started very early on. So those sensitivities, their reactions to no or touch or clothing or food or all of that happened so early on that at this point in time, other people are looking in and going, oh, well, this is the terrible twos for your child. And you're thinking like, well, I was hoping that this was kind of end by this point. You're not imagining that you're going to have to go through this for too much longer. And I think at that point we were just like, well, we don't want to hide behind this whole idea that it is the terrible twos, because it was so, the reactions from our son and from, just whenever he would respond to different things was so far and above another child that it looked like it was so extreme. And I think that was the danger for us, is like, people are looking in, and so he doesn't even look stereotypical, or he looks farther gone than stereotypical child. And so we really haven't done our job, because we've let it go way too far, and yet we're knowing that behind closed doors, this is him just really having a hard time with this, and that it isn't the same as what another child is going through. We could see that very clearly from raising our first son as to raising the second son, that this was very different. And so now we're not falling into any stereotype. We're literally kind of on our own guessing as to what's going on. And then you have other people looking in saying, well, oh, it's just this. Oh, it's just that. And it's like, oh, this too shall pass, just get through it. And we're like, no, we want to enjoy our child. Like, how do we do this and stay sane at the same time? Especially when there's, a lot of hitting, a lot of punching, kicking, screaming, spitting, all that kind of stuff that so many of you out there can resonate with, because that's what's been happening for you. That's why you're here. Is there other stereotypes in regards to this situation in particular that are like, that you would just like to bring up today?
I think there's so many when you stop and think about, because when you start to live by stereotypes, and I grew up living in a stereotype, fairly strict religious home. There's stereotypes for sure. Mm-hmm. The role of a man. Mm-hmm. I think part of my makeup is just realizing that I'm not that, and I think that's why stereotypes really get me going when I hear them. So those are, I think, the dad stereotypes probably are some of the big ones, especially dads with sons, and the stereotype, even I guess not showing emotion And I mean, that's huge with father and son, because you pass that on, or you don't pass it on, whichever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Or you pass on that, emotion isn't necessary or welcomed or understood, or just keep it all under wraps. And where I'm grateful is that I didn't hold on to that, the stereotype of like, my son just needs to be quiet.
Right.
And my wife needs to just go deal with him. Which was another one where it's just like, you deal with the emotional side, and I'll deal with the discipline, which is, that was never part of my makeup. Like that was where something changed in growing up for me and having my own family. And I think I talked a little bit about that the first time that I was on this podcast, is what happened for me on the inside when I saw my son having a hard time, and realizing the tools that I learned, the tools that I grew up with, I can't use them. I don't want to use those tools. They're not going to be helpful. There's some tools out there. I don't know exactly what they are, but in the meantime, I don't want to harm my son by heavy-handed parenting. Like,
right.
That's not my answer. It was never my answer.
Yeah.
And there were times when it felt like, I maybe resorted to it to some degree because I don't know what else to do.
Right.
But that led me on another, path of more questions. And I think the best thing to do is be curious about what's happening.
Yeah.
With your son, instead of, throwing out like, this is what's happening. This is what I understand. This is the way it's always been. This is our story, and this is how we have to deal with this. And what we learned over and over again is like, we did try those things.
That's right.
We did try. And it didn't take long where we realized it's not working. And there's something inside of us that was just bubbling up, and it was like, there's more.
Yeah.
There is so much more, and I know that you and I have talked about that a lot, at what kind of, there's many turning points, for each of us, and I know you've talked about many turning points where all of a sudden you think one way and then something happens, whether it's something in the eyes of your child, when you see something
happening,
and all of a sudden something wakes up on the inside, and it's like, okay, there is another way to do this.
Well, and when you're doing it other people's ways, what somebody else has told you, it's like, well, this is exactly what you need to do. And I remember so many times you and I are in that room and we're dealing with our child or the behaviors that have just happened, or we're like trying to get him to understand, you need to be doing it this way, that's not the right way to behave. You need to be behaving this way. And, and especially in those early years, and then it just isn't working. And we're doing the same thing over and over again for, days on end. And eventually, we would just fall into a heap ourselves, and we're looking at each other and we're completely exhausted. Our son is completely exhausted, and we're like, what the heck are we doing? We are trying to fit into someone else's mold. And not everybody fits into everybody else's molds. I think we had to break through a lot of those stereotypes and just go, whatever. This might be happening, between the ages of 1.5 and 3.5 years old, and people call it the terrible twos. We're gonna call it what we call it, not what everybody else is calling it. And we wanted to get the root of what was happening. We wanted to find out how to take a new path, because we knew that we had exhausted all those other ways that everybody else was saying to do. Whether it was play school, whether it's elementary school, going on to junior high, or whether it's family events, or, all these other kids are able to go and attend, this party or this other thing. And in that typical sense, those kids could do it. And in our sense, that was not what was working for us. Sunday school was another very, very difficult one. Daycare, I mostly worked from home, or I was a stay-at-home mom. But there were those times where it's like, we were moving and I literally needed some time to pack and load and get things, because we weren't in a town where our family was. And so, the boys would go to daycare for a certain amount of hours, and it was just push, pull, and drag. And again, same as what you said earlier, it was like, oh, just leave him. He'd be screaming and we would just leave him. And it just caused for a lot of damage down the road. His little system just couldn't take that separation. And it was something we had to recognize. And we had to put on the blinders and not look at what everybody else was doing and what everybody else was saying. And we had to do it how it worked for us. So we're just believing and hoping for this to be so encouraging to you. We are not finished having these podcasts together. We will bring many more to you over the next number of weeks. Joining together. I feel like this is so powerful for you to hear from Mom and from Dad. And yeah, we just bless you today, and we look forward to spending another episode with you together. Hey Mama, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, would you take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who may be on an uphill battle with her son's unique challenges? Also, please leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. It lights me up to know this podcast is helping you. All right, time to breathe and know that you have everything inside of you to courageously raise your brilliant son. I'll meet you back next week for another episode. Bye.